morning again, Green Spring. Today our guest is Palmer McGrew, and you may have seen a man with an attractive lady riding around the campus in a red convertible, and that would be Palmer, and hopefully it would be Sita. If not, he probably would hear about him. You won't see him in the summer because they're at their house near Bethany Beach, Delaware. And the other 9 months he lives in Oak Hill, and maybe heard about the campus singing with one group or another. And he also was on the softball team. He joined the softball team just very shortly after he moved in here. He will be taking over the leadership of the choristers when Gene Reynolds steps down after Christmas. So, Palmer, welcome to Who's Who.
Thanks, Greg.
It's good to have you. And tell us first about your family, your children and grandchildren.
Well, we have three children.
We have a picture of the whole family here, so if they can move in on it here while we're talking, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have three children. We had a boy and two girls. Of course, they're all grown up now. Their kids are pretty much grown up now. So,
aren't all of them?
Yeah. Our son, Greg, is an optometrist in Leesburg, Virginia. And our daughter, Bonnie Jean, is a teacher, and she lives just outside Richmond. And our daughter, Heather, is an executive, and she lives in Hoboken, New Jersey, and works in Manhattan primarily.
Okay.
And then we have four grandchildren, and as I said, they're pretty much grown up now too.
Well, of course, New York is kind of familiar to you. We'll get to that later. But what about where you were born and raised, and a little bit about your folks?
Yeah, I was born in heaven, in Lincoln, Lincoln, Nebraska.
Sure.
I think Lincoln is the nicest city in the United States. It's like a big park.
Yeah.
Beautiful town, nice people. I lived there until I was 10.
Your mother was from there, I presume?
My mother was born there. My father was born there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My grandparents were pioneers in Nebraska. In fact, all of my great-grandparents were pioneers in Nebraska. I was taught by my mom to revere the pioneers, and I do.
Yeah. I hope we all do.
Yeah. So I lived there till I was 10 when, now for the last 5 years of that, my father had been away in the Army, World War II. And at the conclusion, or a little bit after that, we could go join him in Germany, and we did. And then I became an official Army brat at that point.
Okay.
And lived various places.
Well, I say, do you remember living on any of the Army? Well, you didn't live on any of the Army posts during World War II because you were in Lincoln.
Right.
So it was after the war that your dad, he stayed into the Army, I presume?
He did, yeah. Actually, my dad was an attorney, and he had a tough time graduating from law school right into the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And the place where he actually got a salary was in the Army.
Okay.
So he's a reserve officer, and he really enjoyed getting that money during the Depression. It was tough to come by.
Sure.
He ran CCC camps, and was paid, of course, his officer's salary for that. And then when the war was heating up, he went off to the Army, and we didn't see him again, essentially for 5 years.
45.
Yeah, and he was 46 actually by the time we went to Germany. And then we came back to Governor's Island, New York, which was First Army headquarters, and another idyllic place in New York City, but not in New York City.
Well, it's just, I've been to Fort Jay, and 2 or 3 times, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And it was a nice island.
Oh my gosh, it's just so nice. Right now, it belongs to a city corporation, and they call themselves the. Well, it's not popping in my head right now, but anyway, the preservation is in the title of what they're doing, and I tell them, you're not preserving anything like I know, because Governor's Island was the quietest place you could imagine in New York City. And now on weekends, it just teems with thousands.
I guess I was down there for the first time in 47.
I was there.
Yeah. I don't remember seeing you, but well, you must have some stories about living on Fort J, like the cannon, or maybe caddying for a Major Wilson. Which one would you like to tell?
Well, I love the cannon. I love both the stories, but I love the cannon story because I was not a perpetrator, by the way.
Oh, I see it. You weren't.
It was one piece of Army bratness I didn't get involved in directly. Well, all of us Army brats had fun with the retreat cannon. We found out that the MPs did not check the bore before they fired it. Of course, they were firing a blank round directly at Manhattan. And so we would stuff some, if they'd cut the grass lately and there was long grass, we'd stuff that down in the cannon bore and stick something else in there to be propelled out.
Like golf balls.
Like golf balls. Fortunately, none of those golf balls ever got to Manhattan. They would have killed somebody. But,
yeah, and I don't think you'd see them splashing in the bay.
And we couldn't see them splashing, no. Buttermilk Channel, no. But these friends of mine cooked one up. They had a bunch of fireworks left over from the 4th of July.
Ah.
They cooked this thing up where they touched it off, all their leftover fireworks, exactly as the retreat cannon fired. I don't know how they did it, but they got it perfect. And it made such an explosion that fire departments in Manhattan and Brooklyn were calling out to Governor's Island to see if they could help.
There's that. Well, I won't bring it up to text. But how many schools did you attend then? You were moving around in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah, it wasn't too much. We 2 different schools in Germany. We were on Governor's Island. We were part of a New York City school, PS3 Manhattan.
So you had to go over into Manhattan to school?
No, we didn't. No, we had our own little school building, but we'd go to Manhattan for shop, the boys, and for home ec for the girls.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, you couldn't get away with that now.
Well, do you remember do you have any stories about grade school or high school that you'd like to tell?
Gray knows me. He knows I've got stories. Well, I made a little revolution in 5th grade in Germany. I had just transferred. My dad had just transferred to Heidelberg. In my first day of school, it turned out that instead of recess, they had ballet.
Oh.
Well, for a boy, ballet.
Yeah.
So the first day I went to ballet, and I found out that what boys do in ballet is they pick up girls, and they hold their hands. And in 5th grade, boys don't want to do that.
I can understand that.
So the next day, I told the teacher I wasn't going to ballet. She didn't like that, but I told her I'll be good. I'll sit here. I got work to catch up on. I'll sit here and be good. And I got away with that. And so the next day, all the boys refused to go to ballet. And the teacher said, well, what are we going to do? I've got, I can't, this is my time to rest and relax. I need this time. And I said, I've got you covered. I'll take recess. And they let me do that. Ah. So my mom went to property disposal and special services and came back with all kinds of bats and balls and stuff. And I was in charge of recess from then on. And the boys never went to ballet again, and neither did the girls.
And you played all kinds of games.
And we played all kinds of games, right. In the University of Heidelberg. I attended 5th grade in the University of Heidelberg.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Where'd you graduate from high school?
I wanted to go to West Point. And from Governor's Island, you went to a high school on Staten Island. Now, think about that. You got to take the ferry to Manhattan, then the ferry to Staten Island, and then there was a bus, and then a long walk. It was a bad situation. So I convinced my parents they needed to send me to a prep school so I could get into West Point.
Okay.
And I made a deal with my dad, essentially, you were going to pay for college for me, right? So I'll take care of college, you take care of prep school.
You take care of prep school, huh?
And it worked. I did get into West Point, as you know.
What prep school did you go to?
It was, the name of the school is the Peddy School, P-E-D-D-I-E. It's a wonderful school.
Where is it located?
Hightstown, New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Well, you said you wanted to go. Why did you want to go to West Point?
I had, while we're still in Germany, we were in Garmisch or some other mountain resort, and we were staying in a hotel that we had taken away from the Germans, and it was full of Army officers, these guys who just won World War II, and there was a young man there in an unusual uniform I'd never seen before. And I noticed that these officers would get up from their tables and go over to talk to this young man, like they were going over to hold court with him. Yeah. And I said, what's the deal here, this young guy? And my father said, well, he's a West Point cadet. Now, I don't know how he knew that, but he did. He's a West Point cadet. And I said, I don't understand. What's that? So he told me about West Point. And he said, if you graduate from West Point, you'll be commissioned in the Army, and you'll have an advantage for having gone to West Point. And so that sounded pretty good. And then the next day, I saw this kid playing tennis, and he was fantastic. Ah. And I said, and I stopped to watch, and my dad said, come on, we got to go. I said, I got to watch this. So he came back to drag me to the car, and and I said, how could that young man who was playing 3 officers, how could that young man be that good in tennis? My dad, who was a graduate of the University of Nebraska and serving in the Army with a lot of West Pointers, said, well, at West Point they teach you to be an officer and a gentleman, so they teach you how to play golf and tennis. And I said, I want to go to West Point.
Okay.
It sounds like my kind of school. It wasn't like that at all.
Yeah. No, it wasn't quite like that at all, was it?
As you know.
Well, do you have any interesting stories about your 4 years? You have several interesting stories about your 4 years at West Point. Being on time, I thought is a good one. But what about the lunch bucket award?
Okay. Well, I have a tendency to, but actually I'm going to blame this one on Sita.
Uh-huh. So you met Sita while you were at West Point?
No, I had met Sita before.
Oh.
Just before.
Where is she from? Down in New Jersey?
She actually was from the Haverstraw area of
New York.
New York. Oh. She lived 17 miles from West Point.
Yeah.
And I'd met her at the prep school, actually. She was there for a prom with obviously somebody else.
Yeah.
We got to talking, and I knew right away she was someone I wanted to know, and someone who happened to live near West Point. So I got a hold of her, and she came up in September of my plebe year, and kept coming back. Kept coming.
Well, that's great.
Well, she was back to the lunch bucket.
Yeah. She
was with me at my home in Falls Church, and we were in a store, and she saw this display of lunch boxes.
Yeah, the kind that school kids or
the
people that go on jobs.
Rounded on the top with where a thermos could go.
Yeah.
You know. I had just heard this expression on the radio. Out to lunch. I'd never heard that expression before. I mean, out to lunch, but to be that as a failure on your part, not to be out to lunch. And she said, "I bet you could use that out to lunch thing with that lunchbox." So we bought one, and we took it back to my house and we painted it all up. And I was a first-classman, a senior at the time. And I took it upon myself, no one gave me permission to do this, I took it upon myself to award that to my classmate in the company who had the biggest screw-up the week before. Well, first-classmen are in leadership positions, and they have opportunities to screw up.
Yeah.
And so each week I awarded it to a different person for about 5 weeks. And then the fifth week it was awarded to one of our football players who deserved it. And he took it to class and set it up on his desk, and the instructor promptly confiscated it.
Uh-huh.
So I lost my lunchbox award. But the beauty of this whole thing was that I never saw it again, had no idea where it was, until I graduated and was commissioned a second lieutenant. And my tactical officer, the guy who's responsible for the cadets in the company, said to me, "Lieutenant McGrew, come with me."
Uh-oh.
I had no idea why. So I followed him up to his office, and on his desk is sitting the lunchbox. And he said, "That's yours, I believe." The irony was that I was giving it to people for screwing up, and I was the ultimate recipient.
You still have it?
No, I don't know where it went.
No.
I wish I did.
Well, were you in the Glee Club or the choir? Or?
I wasn't.
Oh.
No,
Neither was I.
yeah. And then we meet in the Glee Club, right?
Yep.
The alumni Glee Club. No, I didn't think I could get into the Glee Club, and what everyone was telling me was that you got all these great trips away from West Point. It was a great opportunity to leave West Point for the weekend and meet girls.
Yeah.
My girl lived right down the road.
So why should I?
So I had no incentive to take trips away from West Point.
Well, you had 3 years on Okinawa after you graduated.
I did.
And any special experiences there?
Well, Okinawa was, I just am so lucky to have lived in the places I lived as a result of my association with the Army. And Okinawa was one of those.
And Sita was with you.
Sita was with me. I got there. We didn't have any quarters available, so maybe this is a story from that. One of my classmates convinced me on the ship on the way over that we should build our own houses because there was a desperate shortage of officer housing on Okinawa. And he did all the work. He found the land and rented it, and he found a builder and got him contracted, and we built 5 houses for 4 of us. And then we had an extra house which the builder then rented out. And we were barely so we got our dependents over earlier than we would have if we'd waited for quarters. That was the whole idea. But whereas it didn't take years for us to get quarters, I had barely finished the house when I got quarters because they threw a bunch
of. Right?
Yeah, what they did, a lot of the quarters were occupied by PX employees and commissary employees, and they threw them out of that officer housing, and we had plenty of housing. But I still own that house, and I rented it out, and there was still enough of a shortage that people would come to me and ask me if they could rent the house. I never had to advertise it.
You sold it when you left.
And I sold it when we left, and it was the biggest real estate mistake I ever made.
Was selling that house?
Was selling it for the amount of money I sold it for, because I had no idea.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were real estate agents there, but I didn't know any. I should have gotten one. Yeah. But a guy showed up at my house and said, "I want to buy it." How much? Well, I had paid, hold on to your socks, I had paid $3,500 for that house. Yeah. Can you imagine? And I said, "Well, I've paid $3,500. I guess I'll sell it to you for that." He said, "Really?" And I already knew I'd made a mistake. Yeah. I probably could have gotten $6,000 or $7,000, but I didn't.
Well, you went to Vietnam. Let's see. Yeah, you went to Vietnam 65, 66.
I did.
And you were an advisor there. Any anything about that tour? That we're down to about 9 minutes, by the way, already.
Oh my God!
It goes fast.
Well, let's go fast. 'Cause you got to give me some time to talk about choristers, okay? Will you do that? No, I actually not that much.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, you spend a year in Vietnam.
I spent 2 years in Vietnam.
That
That
tour?
time was the first, yeah.
Well, yeah, but it was only a year at that time.
That was a year. And
Yeah. Okay. Then you leave Vietnam and you become an ROTC instructor, and this is 66 to 68, which, and I think, as I recall, there was a lot of protesting starting at that time. It wasn't really the big era, but
yeah, but I was in Minnesota.
yeah.
And the people were so nice. It wasn't 100%, but it was 98% of the people were very appreciative of what we were doing, and they honored us really. So I didn't have that problem that people had maybe in San Francisco.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging because that's what I would hope would have been the case.
Yeah, I was very pleased.
So you went back to Vietnam. This 68, 69. Were you there during Tet?
Yeah, but I hardly knew it.
So you didn't.
The whole
You were the
the whole
170.
TED thing is completely not what people think it was.
Yeah.
It's where I was, nothing was happening, anything different. In fact, if anything, they pulled forces out from there to go down to Saigon.
Yeah.
And so, no, I didn't have any remarkable TET experience except the fact I didn't realize it happened. Yeah. And we, at that point in time, we were fighting 12-year-olds and 65-year-olds. There were no really eligible men in between left in the North Vietnamese Army.
And you were with the 173rd. Was that up in about middle? Where was that located?
Yeah. We were in. We were actually in I Corps, First Corps, but it was not the most northern one. Although they went north to south, it was the second most northern one.
Yeah.
So I was in the Highlands. We were up. I wore a sweater for the first 6 months I was there. It was that cool.
Well, you came back to the Command General Staff. You went to the Defense Language Institute, learned Russian. What was your assignment after you learned? Well, first, how well did you know Russian when you left it? Was that about a year long? The DLI?
Well, the program, the Army program, you're going to let me talk about choristers, aren't you?
Yeah, we're going to get there in just a minute.
So the Army program, the Army program is a year of language school, a year of graduate school, and 2 years in country, the country you were studying. But for some reason, the Russians wouldn't let us spend 2 years in their country. Doing that sort of thing. So we had a simulated Russian environment in Germany. So after that 4 years, I spoke Russian, and all my other classmates in the school the same way, most of them. We spoke Russian so fluently that we had a hard time convincing Russians we weren't Russians.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed because I really didn't know how well you learned the language there. But did you have a specific dialect or?
No. Well, that's an interesting thing. We learned the King's English, if you will, in Russian. Yeah. Russians don't really
the
talk
Tsar's
that way.
Russian.
Yes, that's right. And the Russians don't really talk that way. So it'd be, people that have learned English, especially British English, as a second language, and they speak it more correctly than you do. And that's the way it was with us. Russians would say, "Where did you learn to talk like that?"
Okay. So you come back from that and you go to JCS, and you had a very interesting job at JCS.
Well, yeah, I didn't want that job, and yet I loved it.
Yeah.
I was chosen to be the chief of the hotline to Moscow.
Okay.
So if you think about what that's like, I had no idea. I mean, I had a vision of sitting in the White House, and there's the red phone, and I just sit there and wait for the phone to ring. But in fact, it wasn't. There was no red phone. Never was.
Oh.
It was teletype, and it had to be manned 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. So there was a terminal there. I had 5 Russian translators that worked for me, and I was the 6th. But we did 5 shifts, and I filled in for anybody who was missing, which was a lot. They could take leave, and they had to go back for refresher training. So it was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating.
Okay. I can't ask you about stories anymore because we're down to the bare time. You worked in BDM, and I really would like to have been able to talk about that, but we don't have the time. But when did you get interested in singing?
Get interested in
singing?
In singing?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my classmates, it probably starts just a little before that. On the trip to Okinawa on the ship, which was a long one,
okay,
they put me in charge of the band.
Oh.
I had no musical training. Well, hardly any. And so I took them up to the top of the ship where no one could hear them, and made them practice hours every day. And I had one goal in mind, and that was that they could play the 82nd Airborne Division March. And I sang along with them. I knew the words, and from the Glee Club that I wasn't in at West Point, I knew the words from that. And they'd play, and I'd sing.
Okay. So
when we got to Okinawa, people assumed I was a singer. And I joined a church choir, chapel choir, and started singing harmony, and I loved it.
So you've been singing with groups and quartets and so forth ever since then? Whenever you got a chance?
Pretty much.
Okay. Now you're going to be the chief of the choristers. Tell us we've only got about a minute or two.
Well, you mentioned that I'm taking over from Jean Reynolds.
I did, yeah.
And Jean is not going away completely, but she's stepping down from the directorship, if you will. And we need help in the choristers because as you mentioned, I am gone for 3 months.
Yeah.
I need people. I know there are some here at Green Spring, except I don't know them. But I need some people to help me with the directing that can take over when I'm gone in the summer. So all you people out there who could possibly direct, I want you to step forward. Call Jean Reynolds, call Palmer McGrew, call Jenny Sparlin. But we need you. And we also need accompanists on piano. We have them, but they're all in fragile health. And we never know whether they're going to be there or not. Yeah. So if you could possibly accompany us, we need you. Please get hold of me or Jean or Jenny so we can sign you up.
All right. Well, I'm sorry, Palmer, but that's it. We had a whole lot more stories to go through, but time has a way of going. It just goes too fast, and I don't understand it. But that's the way
it's rampant here at Green Spring.
That's right. All right. Well, we have a few announcements.